Hello, welcome to All the Things. I am Monique Duson.
And I am Krista Bontrager, also known as Theology Mom. And this is the show where we talk about all the things
related to God, the Bible, and real life.
Well, you just sort of blew in here. Welcome.
Hi.
You know, you had a big day. Hi. Very tired. But shout out to our moderators. I think Sylvia and Laura are on there tonight helping to keep the peace. Thank you very much.
Future's on here too. She like a junior moderator. I don't just need to be a moderator. Did you ever email us, Future?
I know. I really want to know who you are. So we are live on this fine Saturday night, February 8th. So what's happening in your neck of the woods? What have you been up to this week?
You know, has been a hard week, and I'm just here. I had a friend pass this week, and this week has really sucked.
Someone who had been a close friend of yours
for a very long time. Yes,
and a while back.
Mm-hmm. And it's complicated.
Yeah.
That's the best way to put it.
But
and so,
you posted a nice picture of you guys from
I did.
About, I don't know, maybe 10 or so years ago on Facebook.
That was the only picture I could find, like in the moment when I was making the post. But I found some other recent pictures and I was like, oh, should I go back and da-da-da-da? And I was like, no, like it's fine. But he's someone that I really loved, like a brother, and
but it's not your brother.
It's not my brother.
Because I think people were sort of freaking out on Facebook.
Yes, they have the same name.
Yeah, similar names, but it's not.
So they do have the same name, but it's complicated. And that's all I'll say is that it's complicated.
Yeah,
and so, but yeah, it's probably the hardest week I've had in a long time.
Yeah,
so just gonna keep it real. That's where we are today.
So, Krista, what have you been up to? Well, you know, I've been up to my dissertation this week. I worked on it all week, and I think I finished chapter 6. So I'm almost done. Just as we were sitting here, I saw in my email, in my inbox, that I have comments from the peer review. So I've got to start getting those in the mix. So things are progressing.
That's great.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. So we have the book clubs.
We do. Our book clubs are starting.
Registration opened this week.
They do. I'm going to lead a book group through the queering of the American child.
Yes. Yeah. And our friend Arnold Huntley will be leading a group through our book, Walking in Unity. And then our friend Jen Vital will be leading a group through Natasha Crane's new book, When Culture Hates You. And so if people want to find out more information about the book groups, just go to centerforbiblicalunity.com. And then you're going to scroll down. It's going to show us how it's done. And then there's a big thing that says virtual book groups. And that will take you to the page where you can find out all of the information of who's leading it, get the information on when the groups meet and all of that. So you can go to centerforbiblicalunity.com/book clubs. Go check out a book. Make some new friends.
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
Tonight's conversation is on the topic of divorce with our good friend, Sister Faust.
Yes. So I asked Katy several months ago if she would come on the show in the new year and talk to us about divorce. You know, Katy doesn't just tweet things about in vitro fertilization and surrogacy. She also does a fair amount of posts about marriage and divorce and the impact of divorce and the impact that it can have on kids, even adult children. And she makes a lot of provocative posts. So I asked her if she would come on and help us with a public conversation about this.
I appreciate that with Katy. You always know where you stand. Like she's clear. I love clarity. Yeah. And
Well,
she doesn't back down. I feel like she believes in that double down, much like I do. Like, you didn't like that. Let me say it this way then.
yeah. So I know it's a controversial and for some people a painful topic, but I think we're going to really talk about it in trying to find a principled approach to the situation and really helping people think it through, because it's a topic that impacts a lot of people.
It really does.
Yeah.
It does.
All right. And with that, let's bring Katy on. Welcome to the show, Katy.
It's always great to be with you two. Thank you for letting me chat with you and chat with your audience, who I know is zealous about following God and being salt and light to their community. So like whenever you're able to connect with a demographic like that, that is very, very serious about a life well lived, it's an honor.
Well, thanks for being here with us. I'm just going to take a moment to say you look fabulous. Go ahead, honey. Live it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
The lighting, I'll tell you, once I got legit ring lighting where you can kind of change the button and be like, today I'm going to glow. Now I'm going to look like an ice princess. Now it's just going to fade into the wall. Everything changed for me. Everything changed.
Yeah, it's all of it. I say yes. Yes, yes. Well,
yeah.
You want to...
The Marshall's glasses are doing a lot of work today, so.
I love them. I think they are so cute. And I could, just have a whole conversation about that. But we're here to actually accomplish something.
Yes. Well, I first of all, I want to say up front, Katy, I really appreciate this conversation. It's hard to find good dialogue partners on the topic of divorce. For me, I'm a child of divorce. I was raised by a single parent and didn't really have a father in the home for almost all of my childhood. And I think that it's a touchy subject for a lot of people. And so we want to let people know up front, even though we might be talking about it in some analytical ways, doesn't mean that we're lacking compassion for the humanity involved of being on in that journey and experiencing that in your real life. But let's maybe start by talking, kind of laying some biblical groundwork.
Well, I first appreciate you kind of acknowledging that this is really painful. It is hard to find somebody who has not been touched by divorce, especially sort of the Gen X people and below, because we were brought up in the height of the divorce epidemic. And my job, if I'm doing what God has called me to do, I am going to clearly and articulately, accurately, hopefully reflect the perspective of the child rights and well-being when it comes to matters of divorce. And in my world, somebody is going to have to do the hard thing when a marriage is struggling. It will either be the adults who work it out, or it will be the children who suffer, as we will discuss, lifelong increased risk of physical harm, emotional harm, behavioral harm, relational harm, and academic harm. But that is not to say that I do not completely understand and sympathize with adults who are struggling, because when I am not activisting on behalf of children, I have for the last couple decades been counseling people. My husband's been a pastor for a couple decades, and we have done an awful lot of pre-marriage counseling, mid-marriage counseling, family marriage counseling, crisis marriage counseling, walked through situations of porn addiction, economic struggles, job loss, diagnosis of terrible illnesses of people's children, childhood baggage that's reemerging, in-law friction that is pulling the fabric of the marriage apart. I mean, I have been there on the side of adults who are struggling, and I'm never going to minimize how challenging a lot of these marital issues can be. So, I mean, if this is where you are right now, you have my empathy, because it's a burden that not only, it's usually not momentary, even though a lot of times, it'll last a year or two, and then the for better comes after the for worse. But sometimes it can be a many-year process with, if there is growth, it's slow and it's painful. So I just appreciate kind of starting that out, Krista. We understand that this is something that has touched everybody, but God has very strong opinions for very good reason on marriage and divorce. And that's what hopefully we'll talk about today.
Yeah, it's a really good way to say that. Maybe let's just lay a little biblical groundwork first. What are your thoughts?
No, I was just going to ask for, the biblical foundation. I would was thinking like, well, let's biblically define marriage, and then we can move into um, the topic of divorce and more of that. But we want to start out with the good, true, and beautiful, and what Scripture says, and that would be marriage. And so, what is that biblical definition and foundation for marriage?
Well, this is fun for me because I don't actually do this part of the conversation very often. I was telling Krista before we started, I'm like, I'm gonna do a little refresher on some of this because I tend to focus a little more on the social science, sort of natural law side of marriage. But obviously I am a zealous Bible thumper. I was like, I better get this part, put together for the Center for Biblical Unity girls who love the Bible all the time. So we'll just kind of kick things off with the framework of pre-fall, God instituted marriage. It was the first institution. It was before the church. It was before the nation of Israel. It was before government. It was before the fall. It existed when humans walked with God in the garden. So this is a fundamental part of what it means to be human, pre-fall, post-fall, and into our redemption in Christ. So the two become one, right? That's God presided over that first marriage. It was one man, one woman. It was a complementarity union of two different parts coming together. It was permanent. What God has joined together, let no man separate. And it was exclusive, that nobody else was to enter into this covenantal relationship with them. So from the very beginning, we saw this aspect of permanence, complementarity, and exclusivity. And then throughout Scripture, God continues to reinforce and reiterate this, where obviously there are distortions of his plan and his design, especially you can think of sort of the patriarchs and polygamy, where they rejected the idea of exclusivity and they included unrelated partners in their marital union, or in the marital bed at least. And while in certain epochs of God's relationship with his children, he did not explicitly condemn it, the circumstances of the family that followed are their own form of condemnation. You won't ever find a polygamous family in the Bible that's characterized by equity and joy and unity. It's always fractious, unequal, and contentious. So moving into the New Testament, well, actually, I'll say before that, there is that sort of famous passage in Malachi that a lot of people know, especially if you're considering divorce, probably because it's been leveled at you or brought up first in your returns when you Google it. God hates divorce. And he does. He does. That specific quote comes from Malachi when a lot of the religious leaders at the time were swapping out their first wives for young, hot trophy women. And God said, I hate your worship because you don't have integrity in your marriage life. You are not holding sacred the union with your first wife, and you're tossing her aside. And he talks about how, why did God make the two one? He says, in spirit and unity, they are his. And why the two one? Why? And he answers his own question. He says, because he's seeking godly offspring. So he speaks very clearly about how the purpose of bringing man and woman together is because of the next generation. You can absolutely have a very valid marriage without having children, but God's main aim for marriage as a corporate institution is aimed at the next generation, and not just creating offspring, but creating godly offspring. And we do see that so often when children's parents break up, the marriage breaks down, it is harder for kids, especially for Christian couples, to hold on to their faith. It's harder to raise up godly offspring when you're doing that in the wake of a divorce. And then moving into the New Testament, Matthew, there's all kinds of challenges because there was quite a bit of argumentation among the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the different lawyers about what are the grounds of divorce?
Yeah.
Because most permitted it. And you had some groups that said, you can divorce your wife. Now, wives couldn't necessarily divorce the husband, but you can divorce your wife for any reason. One of the famous reasons was if she burns the toast, bye, be gone, woman, you're out of here. And then you had the more conservative kind of factions that said, no, you can't just divorce her for any reason. There needs to be something really serious. So they brought it to Jesus and said, what say you, Jesus? Who's right? Can you divorce your wife for any reason? Or do you actually have to hold on to the old hag, even if you don't want her? And he's like, have you not read that he who created marriage from the beginning made them, brought them together? And it's a very gendered definition of marriage. Man shall leave his father and mother, be joined to his wife, They will become one flesh. Okay. What God has joined together, let no man separate. And then he says, Moses permitted you to get divorced, but it was because of the hardness of your hearts. But that's not the plan. That's not the ideal. So later on, we see that adultery is allowed for as a reason for divorce. And Jesus, I mean, you read this stuff and you're like, we don't take divorce nearly as seriously as Jesus did. He says, if anyone divorces his wife for any reason other than adultery and remarries a woman, he becomes an adulterer. He makes her an adulteress. So you just can't play around with this. I mean, the idea of casual divorce or divorce for, a reason that is not biblically valid or at least recognized by church fathers, church teaching, church tradition, you're on very, very shaky ground there.
And I think you're saying it well, is that the Bible is not for frivolous divorce, just willy-nilly kind of situations. There are specific parameters of when God does allow it. But I think most foundationally, what you said there is that divorce is a result of the fall. Mm-hmm. It is a result of humanity's sinfulness. And it was never part of God's design in a pre-fall world of what he was doing in setting up the family. It was one woman and one man for one lifetime until death. I mean, that's the plan. That's God's ideal before sin. But once sin enters the picture, things become a lot more complicated. Mm-hmm. And I think that what's difficult in that is when you take two sinners and you put them together in a marriage relationship without Christ as the bond that really holds them together. Quite frankly, I feel like the divorce rate should be higher because when you have two sinners coming together in marriage, there's a lot of reasons for not staying together. Life is long. There are many seasons. Mm-hmm. And I've been married for 32 years. Life is long. There's a lot of seasons that you go through. And I think that, what you're bringing up here with the teachings of Christ is really important because we as Christians are putting Christ at the center of a marriage. That's the glue. And that there are some reasons to try to sustain in a difficult marriage, but then there's also some biblical reasons that maybe a marriage doesn't survive. Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just thinking, when you're saying for those outside of Christ, it seems like the divorce rate would be higher because you have two sinners trying to come together. Unfortunately, what we see is the divorce rate is basically equal inside and outside of the church. It's really sobering when we think about some of the statistics that are out there. And I know that there's, other statistics that talk about, well, when you say inside the church, are you talking about they go to church together, they pray together, they read the word together, or are they just, claiming the name of being a Christian?
Yeah.
I do think that either way, it's unfortunate.
There. Yeah. Because we've heard that a lot, that the divorce rate is the same inside the church and outside of the church. And thankfully, that's not true. Now, what you said, Monique, is exactly right. If you're a nominal Christian and you call yourself a Christian, then you'll see sort of an equivalence between the general public and the divorce rate. Just like, Nancy Pearcey talks about in her book on toxic masculinity, or the attack on masculinity. She talks about how you actually see some of the highest rates of abuse in men who call themselves Christians, but don't attend church. Yeah. And that's because they have some level of understanding that they are the head. They probably perceive that as power and dominance, but they're not connected to the church body. They're not attending weekly. They're not in relationship with men that are discipling them. And so they misuse that authority. So what we do see is, and I can pull up the numbers if you want me to, that when husband and wife attend church together on a weekly basis, you have extremely low divorce rates, which is a very, very good news. And there's so many other things that you can do also that will lead you to have a divorce risk that is probably under 10%, like having shared values, not cohabitating or having sex before marriage, being on the same page in terms of expectations about whether or not you're going to have children. So this idea that divorce is inevitable or that it's running rampant through the church, thank God, is not true at all. And that there's a lot that you can do if you're heading into your season of marriage to make sure that you are going to build a strong foundation. And there's no guarantees, but there's an awful lot you can do to build a divorce-free future.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah,
and
it is.
what I've heard is that there's kind of the three big A's before divorce of when there's a biblical case for it. Abandonment, adultery, and abuse. For me, the tricky part is that the word abuse is a sociological term. It's not in the Bible. And so then you get in the kind of the tricky space of, well, what really qualifies as abuse and when is it abuse? And whenever I have conversations with people about this and want to talk to me about abuse, just even nailing down a definition of it can be very tricky. And I would love for you to share what your thoughts are. I don't think it's disputed, adultery and abandonment. Like pretty much all Christians agree on that. Where it gets a little bit more difficult is that third A, which is abuse.
Yeah. Well, I did a little bit of digging on this because, again, I tend to tackle these questions from the sociological standpoint. What does the data say about, how children fare and when different kinds of marital disruptions lead to divorce? And so we can talk about that. But I went back and I did a little bit of study because you're right. Historically, Christians have agreed that adultery is a clear-cut grounds for divorce. And in the first couple of centuries, we don't have a whole lot more information than that. Obviously, abandonment based on 1 Corinthians chapter 7, where if you're living with an unbelieving spouse, leave you, the person is then free to go and remarry. But for the first couple hundred years, we don't have a whole lot more information about that. Then when Roman Catholicism started to be the dominant form of Christianity, they elevated marriage to the level of a sacrament where there was some aspect of your salvation, or a certain form of grace that God dispensed through that sacrament to you. And I mean, I am like the most diehard marriage fan that you're going to find, but elevating marriage to the position of a sacrament where there is a dispensation of grace and some salvific ramifications of that coming to you, unfortunately, I think overstated the case. I mean, it's hard for me, to say a marriage case can be overstated, but considering marriage as a sacrament does that in some ways. And what that meant is that the Catholic Church did not see any reason for divorce at all. And so they went hyper beyond what scripture said, right? They didn't allow any exceptions. If there was a case of adultery or extreme cruelty, sometimes there could be a separation, but not a divorce. Their workaround for this was annulments, where you could say, well, never mind, the marriage never existed to begin with. But then the reformers, specifically Calvin and Luther, both said, you guys are not actually adhering to biblically what is permitted and allowed for based on, what scripture says about divorce, which clearly is abandonment and adultery. But both Calvin and Luther said, look, extreme cruelty is also a grounds for divorce because it's obviously not fulfilling that mandate of Christ and the church, the picture that it is supposed to be, not just for the individual couple, but for all of society. But both of them were very careful to make sure that extreme cruelty could not just be diffused into any kind of level of dissatisfaction with the relationship. It really did need to be abusive. And so the Protestants did begin adding that element of a criteria as grounds for divorce. And that has been accepted in civil law really throughout the Western world, especially the countries that have a Protestant foundation. And then I would say, what is the role of government? I was reading Wayne Grudem's book on government, and he just distills the role of biblical government, right? If a government is doing what it's supposed to do, it's going to do three things. It is going to try to minimize evil, it's going to try to promote good, and it is going to bring order. And properly defining marriage does all of those things. and providing the right kind of constraints for divorce, but then also permission for divorce in those narrow cases of adultery, abandonment, and abuse, absolutely fulfills those three mandates of government, which is why abuse has been recognized throughout most of Western civilization as some grounds for divorce throughout, most of those countries. So while there isn't explicit mention of it in scripture, I would say that it is consistent with a biblical ethic to include abuse, which I think, cruelty is probably a better way of putting it, because it's a little more objective than just, these days you can say I'm being emotionally abused, and it just means, he says no to, my crazy spending habits or something. I've seen that in the marriage counseling we've done. Well, this is abusive. No, he just disagrees with some of the decisions that you're making.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a shame that words like abuse and trauma have been so flippantly used, because it would help to narrow some of those lanes down to be like, no, this is actually, abusive and not just a disagreement or a place where you don't really like what his answer is or her answer. Because I also want to acknowledge that when we talk about cruelty, that can go both ways.
Yes.
It's not just a him to her situation. One of the things that you do with them before us is it's always child-centered. It's always, adults do the hard things. We are focusing on the children. And when we think about divorce, I feel like your approach is different, because it isn't about like what so many of our friends who go through divorce are talking about, like, well, I don't like this, I can't take another minute of it. It's what is going to be best for children. How do adults do the hard thing? And so when you think about adults doing the hard thing, how does the issue of divorce fit into a child-centered approach? Like what makes this different, or the impact what is the impact that you see on children when it is not child-centered?
Mm-hmm. So we did all of the, hey, adults, we understand that this can be difficult for you times. Now we're going to talk about why this is hard on kids. And it's hard on kids in every way that it can be hard on kids. There is no such thing as a good divorce. You might think, hey, this is going to be okay, my kids are going to figure it out. And they might be able to get over it. But Judith Wallerstein did some of the best, deepest, most widely ranging research on children of divorce. And she surveyed thousands of kids who had gone through divorce, many of whom were impacted by the no-fault divorce epidemic. Now, this is people who didn't get divorced because of abandonment, addiction, adultery, abuse. It was because their parents fell out of love, which is 2/3 to 70% of the marriages today. They're not ending because the parents are having fights where they're throwing plates across the kitchen, table. They are falling out of love. They're refusing to work it out. Maybe there's one parent that just wants to leave and the other parent wants to continue to stick it out and work it out on behalf of the kids. The majority of divorces is not abuse related. And we've made provisions for abuse for good reason, because there are times where at minimum separation needs to take place, if not divorce. But that's not what divorce is today. Largely divorce is adults refusing to do hard things. And let me just tell you what that means. It doesn't mean the hard thing goes away. It means the adults say, oh, this cross is too heavy for me. Here, kid, you take it instead. That's what it is. It is very often trading temporary struggles that the adults are facing, whether it is communication issues or financial struggles, or maybe some emotional affair or pornography, situations which are not minimal, but often temporary, and instead saddling the children with lifelong loss and harm. And we can go through some of those if you want, but there is no part of the child's life that is unaffected by divorce. We see declining rates of physical health. We see increased risk of behavioral and mental health challenges. We see cratering high school graduation rates. We see these children struggling to form and maintain their own healthy relationships and marriages in the future. And we see them being deprived of at least 50% of their mother or father. And those are in the best case scenarios. Very often, Krista, it's more like what you experienced. 2 years after a child's divorce, 40% of kids never see their non-residential parent again, usually their father. So oftentimes divorce means they actually will lose one of their parents altogether. So this is, honestly, it's one of the greatest harms to children that we have ever inflicted in this nation. And it was hardly a blip on the radar for the church. Unfortunately, there was not enough of an objection to it. And as a result, we've got generations of children who were damaged and devastated.
I think that's very, it ought to get our attention, I guess. And as a child of divorce, my parents divorced when I was 2 years old. I saw my father maybe on average 2 to 3 weekends a year until I was about 13. And then he just stopped. I don't know if he stopped trying or what, but it just didn't continue from that point. And it was, I think that the success that I've had is the exception, but my emotional life was a wreck. And living through decades of therapy and overcoming and struggles with mental illness, you know, I'm a sample size of one. So I want to be careful not to universalize my experience. But for me, what you're describing rings true for my experience. And I think, though, there's this narrative, well, children are resilient. They'll recover. It'll be okay. And I'm wondering if you can maybe go into more specifics of those impacts. You've kind of given the big picture, but I'm wondering, you know, if you can dig into some of those impacts even more.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the children are resilient line has functioned as a permission slip for adults to do anything they want, wreck any kind of aspect of the child's home life that they want, and believe in their minds that everything is going to be fine. Children are not resilient. They're fragile. They're actually extremely fragile. The younger they are, the more fragile they are. And we know that, right? This is why God gave children two parents and required them stay together. And we talk in our book, our first book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. The way that we explain this, my co-author, Stacey Manning, and I, is that there are three staples of a child's social emotional diet, three macronutrients that they need to be feasting on every single day if they are going to grow into autonomous, responsible, confident adults. Those three macronutrients are mother's love, father's love, and stability. If the child is starved of any one or more of those macronutrients, we know that they are going to struggle later in life. So what does divorce do? It halves mother's love and father's love, okay? And this is the best case scenario. This is a good divorce where the child is getting 50-50 time. Maybe that the kid, like, there's no parental conflicts at all. They are accessing both of them equally, but they're still at the place where they are starved of 50% of mother's love or 50% of father's love. Another problem with divorce, probably one of the biggest problems, is there's no stability. You know, again, Judith Wallerstein said, divorce is deceptive. Legally, it looks like one event, but it really kicks off a chain of events of dad moving out, mom getting remarried, dad repartnering, mom having another baby, dad breaking up, dad moving to another town, mom having another baby, dad hooking up with somebody else. They have a stepchild with them. And now there's a whole new family unit here. And then mom gets divorced, because I'll tell you, the rates of divorce only increase with your second, third, fourth, and fifth marriages. And so that divorce that began as a single event typically leads to all kinds of instability in the child's life. And so it's no wonder that these kids are struggling. They are being starved of all three of their macronutrients. Now, children can be resilient. We want them to be able to overcome challenges and face difficult things, but not if they're starving. I mean, think about it. If you had a child who, got plenty of starch, plenty of vegetables, but never got any protein. And then you expect the kid to, when they're 18-year-old, go and run a marathon. Good luck, right? You literally have not given the child what they need to nourish their physical body so that they can operate confidently and independently. That's what you're doing with divorce. Now, some kids are going to therapeutic their way out of it, right? Or just by the skin of their teeth, figure it out. But the stats don't lie. We have so much data on the harms that children experience post-divorce that there's no way to say kids are resilient, they're going to get over it. The answer is it's much more likely that this is going to devastate their physical health, their emotional health, their relationship, and their academics for life.
So all that you're saying harkens me back to a conversation I had recently with a friend. And it was more than just this friend, but the conversation went in the direction of, I wish my parents would have gotten a divorce. Like, my parents didn't talk to each other. We saw, all kind of, not violence, but just
High conflict.
almost just like relational neglect. Apathy. Like, their relationship was just super apathetic, and this one did this and this one said that. And it just led to, for this one friend, this idea that it would have been better if they would have divorced. What do you say to that when you have a child now who is an adult, reflects on their childhood and thinks, you know what? At least we wouldn't have had this conflict. And I would have potentially, if one of my parents would have remarried, I would have had the potential to see something that was healthy.
Yeah. So I understand that kind of rationale because it's very painful to see your parents in a challenging marriage. The data that we have does show that children, especially in high conflict marriages where it's very, very clear that there is something very wrong with the parents, usually because there's lots of arguing or screaming, or there is some physical confrontations taking place, that after a divorce, those children do experience some relief because they look at that situation and say, that was clearly broken, and I've experienced some relief now that the marriage is over. But that should not be confused to say that the children who are post-divorce of the high conflict marriage do just as well as the children who were raised by the parents who were able to work it out. The best case scenario is those adults do the hard work of going to therapy, getting accountability, personally working on what they need to work on so that it no longer remains an apathetic, unhappy, high conflict marriage, so that it can move into the place of genuine friendship and connection and low conflict and healthy communication skills so that the child does not have to experience that kind of fragmentation. But we do have studies that say that in those cases, I don't know about apathetic, but certainly high conflict, where the child does experience relief.
Yeah.
Now, the challenge.
What? Sorry.
The challenge for that is, let's say her parents had broken up. Her divorce likelihood increases by about 45%. If her parents had divorced, she herself, statistically, right, and statistics aren't destiny, but it's a good indication of what might come. She is going to have a harder time remaining married when she gets older, even if she does marry, which she's less likely to get married as well. If one of her parents had then remarried, okay, let's say that her parents did get divorced and then one of them remarries, her divorce statistic rises to 91%. So in her mind, she thinks, well, this would have been great. But as the child processes, there's something about that marriage breakup that mars their ability to seek and maintain a relationship. And then if their parent remarries a step parent, it further puts them in the hole of being able to overcome that kind of challenge that was modeled for them. So there's a possibility that there was an exception here, but the rule is that divorce is going to make it harder for a child to maintain their own marriage, and a parent's remarriage is going to double that risk.
And this just makes me so grateful for my situation, because I think if my parents had stayed together, my mother had not had the courage to leave a high conflict abusive marriage, it would have been far worse for me in the long run. And what I had to do, though, as an adult, was do a lot of work in therapy to not repeat that cycle. And there was so much brokenness in me coming into the marriage because of not having any kind of framework of living with two parents. Like, what does this even look like? How am I going to navigate this? And having almost no awareness in the beginning when I was in college of even the impact of my parents' divorce. And so in the beginning, that was a lot of the work in therapy, was just trying to come to terms with something that I didn't even understand the impact of. But then as my children were born, going back to therapy for 10 more years to try to do better as a parent so that I don't ruin something really good in my life because I had no way of understanding how to navigate conflict in a more productive way because I had never seen it modeled for me. And so it's been a long road of a lot of difficulty, but high level of commitment on my part to try to stop the curse of divorce and to not saddle my children with that.
Yeah. Ryan and I both come from divorced homes, and I definitely had the better divorce. Like, my story sounds so much more dramatic than his because, you know, my father dated and remarried. You know, he remarried a couple times. My mom repartnered with a woman, and everybody thinks that's so dramatic. But I actually had the lower conflict life compared to Ryan. You know, his parents fought before they divorced, and they just kept fighting after the divorce. And, you know, new partners, new siblings. He always felt like he was the outsider. He never was the major player anymore in either one of those households. He was always kind of on the outside. And, you know, so we both came into our marriage not having a whole picture, not certainly never having it modeled for us. Thank God we each had examples in our life of marriages that were biblical, that we admired, who were encouraging us, but we'd never seen it in our home. And so I remember Ryan saying, like, during our dating relationship, like, grabbing me by the shoulders and said, "Do you understand that if we get married, we are never divorced? My children will never live through what I lived through. Do you understand me?" And I was like, "Sure, you're totally hot. I'm sure we'll be able to work it out. No problem." And then, like, we got into marriage, and I needed women to come up to me and say, "Hey, Katy, do you see how you just talked about your husband in front of his friends? Don't ever do that again." I was like, "Oh my God." Like, I just didn't know how to be married in a lot of ways. I didn't know what it looked like to build him up in a way where I wasn't going to, you know, push us towards the place where we were going to destabilize our marriage. And he needed to learn to trust me because he just was always on edge that something catastrophic was going to happen and I might leave. And I think it was finally like 13 years in, because he would say, "You're not going to leave me, are you?" Or he'd be like, "Everything's okay, right?" And I finally said, "You offend me, good sir. Like, you must stop asking or even wondering or thinking that I'm going to leave you. Like, I've never given you any indication." But it just, something in his mind was always prepared for everything to end at a moment's notice. And
welcome to my mental space.
Yeah.
It's like, I can relate to that.
Yeah. So it's just, you want to talk about, like, not repeating the cycle. You will become what you behold. Like, if you behold your parents having a high conflict marriage, if you behold them breaking up and not working it out, honestly, unfortunately, that's going to be your default setting. Can you overcome it? Yes. With therapy, the help of the Spirit, and a hell of a lot of accountability and people in your life trying to set you in the right direction, allowing yourself to behold lots of good examples. We had so many wonderful older couples at church that we just would watch and study. Look at how they're parenting their kids. Look at how he's complimenting her. Look at how she respects him. Like, we had to, like, rewire ourselves. And honestly, it was the church that helped us do it.
I don't know if you've done any research on this, and so if you haven't, that just say. But it makes me also wonder about this third option of just opting out. Like, how many kids do you see who either A, come from high conflict marriages where the parents stay together? Because I do think that that's the third option. Like, you get parents and kids who, you know, the kids are like, "My parents should have divorced. I'm never doing that.
So the opt-out is
I'm not
going to get married.
Yeah, I'm not going to get married because I'm not going to do what my parents did and stay with someone who I shouldn't stay with, or have a high conflict marriage, or I didn't see it modeled well, and so I'm not going to participate because I probably won't do it anyway. And I won't do it well anyway. Is there any research on those who just kind of take the third path and opt out?
So unfortunately, there's a lot of kids opting out. And the majority of kids, especially the Gen Xers and millennials who should be getting married right now are the ones that grew up in the wave of the divorce epidemic. And so what we see is, again, the kids that come from the high conflict marriages whose parents do break up, they experience some relief. Why? Because it makes sense to them. They're like, I understand there was a problem and now we needed to get out of it. But I'll tell you, the kids that are absolutely devastated, it's the kids from the low conflict marriages. It's the one where they didn't see any major issues, right? Mom and dad just had an amicable divorce, or, dad one day decided, they just kind of mutually were like, I just don't think it's working for us anymore, but don't worry, we're still going to be friends. And you're still going to see dad all the time. And he's just going to move a couple blocks away. And nothing has changed. Like, dad and I are still going to be in your life, but the kid is devastated. The two people who love the most don't love each other anymore. Now they've got sometimes a revolving door of new partners coming in and out of their mother or their father's life, often leading to more breakup and instability. But mainly their heart is crushed. And the problem is there's no explanation. They didn't see any plate throwing. They didn't see any screaming, right? There wasn't a high conflict situation in their world. Their life was perfect and their home was tranquil. And that's the place they wanted to be. And then all of a sudden, it's gone. Those are the kids that suffer the most after a divorce. And I think that you hear a lot of the time the kids asking, a lot of kids that go through a divorce at some point are going to think it must have been me. They blame themselves for the divorce. That's less true in a high conflict marriage, because you can look at that and go, I wasn't throwing the plates. That wasn't me. But in the no fault divorce situation, in the low conflict marriages that break up, to the kid, they're like, there's no explanation for this. I must be the reason why. So then they carry guilt, shame, burden, but mainly just the devastation. And then what do they learn from that going into their own romantic partnerships? What they learn is marriage is risky. Hooking up is safe, right? Marriage, that's the place where you've got to be really careful. But cohabitation, no big deal, right? So now we see skyrocketing rates of cohabitation, or just like you said, opting out, right? They aren't forming relationships. Sometimes, unfortunately, this next generation, they're not even having sex. Okay, we have so damaged the next generation that it's hard for them to have in-person relationship with friends, let alone romance, let alone a healthy dating pathway where they have appropriate interactions, slowly work their way up, define the relationship, get married, and stay together. So we have an awful lot of opting out right now. And I would argue that a lot of that is probably the kids who experienced the no fault divorce, the low conflict divorce, because what they learned is anyone can leave you at any time for any reason, and you'll never see it coming.
Man, that is, I am going to be, how old am I going to be? 55?
55.
Next month.
Yep.
And I can so relate to that mindset, that anyone can leave you for any reason or no reason at any time. And this is the kind of the static that's in the back of my mind regularly. And that's very relatable. So on the no fault divorce issue,
let me just pause there and say, I want to talk about mental health, because the mental health toll that divorce takes on children is significant. But there's a very specific aspect of this for girls. And I'm just saying this, Krista, because you're being so gracious and vulnerable about that when you look at the emotional cost to kids, girls whose parents divorce there's a direct correlation between increased rates of depression and loneliness, attachment, anxiety, and avoidance, chronic stress, suicide ideation, and suicide attempts. There is something about divorce that especially hits girls in the heart in ways that unravels them mentally and emotionally. Now, boys tend to have more of an impact on their physical bodies. So there was a study done in 2017 that examined father loss. And as we said, divorce is one main reason for father loss. The other two pathways of father loss that this study examined was incarceration and death. So incarceration, death, and divorce are kind of all in the same category for these social scientists. What they were studying is they were studying telomere length. So telomeres are the end caps of your chromosome, and they're responsible for health and longevity. Literally, how long will you live and how healthy will you be? And what they found is that father loss shortened children's telomere length. Losing your dad to death, incarceration, or divorce impacts your physical health and will shorten your lifespan. And especially boys were impacted. I mean, girls, they saw some telomere loss, but boys, it was like twice as much. So it's like, we've got very real objective data on the harms to kids. And we cannot ignore this. Divorce truly is a matter of justice for children. And for so long, we have just reasoned it away with if the adults are happy, the kids will be happy talk, or the kids are resilient talk, or the love makes a family talk. And it is not true. Divorce is so directly correlated to physical, mental, emotional, academic, and relational health. There is no disentangling the two. And this is why we have to take it very, very seriously, especially as believers, especially because believers and Christians are called to be protectors of children. And that means having a very severe outlook on divorce.
I love that you hit on the telomere and
I knew you'd love that.
Yeah, I do. But, looking at death and incarceration and having divorce up there with that. So part of what you're referring to is ACEs, and the ACEs score for children, the Adverse Childhood Experiences score. And the ACEs is really used to look at the possibility or the, potentiality for a child to develop PTSD. And so these are some of the experiences that children go through that would help someone to say, this child, has experienced this. This could possibly lead to PTSD. It isn't always going to be guaranteed in every child, but they have a higher potential to struggle with PTSD and all of the things that come along with PTSD, struggling in education, struggling in health, health-related things, struggling with their mental health. And so when you put divorce in that category of death, incarceration, a near-death experience for the child themselves, all of that, it's very weighty and significant.
Divorce.
Go ahead.
Divorce is recognized as an ACE, and it is connected very directly to all different kinds of elevated risks in terms of health. That's because that ACE factor has this impact on children's genes called gene methylation, where there's like chemical markers that attach themselves to the gene and sort of reset the child's body. Like it increases sort of an inflammation response. It's sort of that permanent fight or flight, making them more susceptible to things like chronic illnesses. And then on that topic of death, like we think, okay, well, death of a parent, that's really serious, right? That for sure is an ACE. And some people are like, but is divorce really an ACE? Are you sure? There's been 2 studies done now that have shown that children fare worse when their parents divorce than when they lose their parent to death. And I mean, you think about that and you think, well, that's stunning, but actually it makes sense, because if a child's parent dies, and I use my husband as an example with his permission, his mother suddenly died in a really tragic public accident when he was 16. Everybody, not just his immediate family, but the school and his church and the whole city surrounded, like had a memorial for her. People would call, they would send flowers, they remembered her, they put up pictures of her. He was filled with communion in his remembrance. But when his parents divorced at age 3, nobody looked back fondly on his home, on the marriage of, everybody said, oh, you're better off without them. He had to mourn and remember alone. And, that's kind of how it goes. Like when a parent's divorced, there's some level of volition there with one or both parents. He can look at either of them or both of them and say, you wanted this. Whereas when a child's parent dies, in almost every case, you could say they didn't want this. They would be with you if they could.
Yeah.
So what I hear, though, Katy, is that we need no fault divorce because that protects people who are in abusive marriages. If we get rid of no fault divorce, we're not going to have a mechanism for people to get out of abuse. This is the argument that I hear all the time on social media. How would you respond to that?
Oh,
okay.
I was going to say, can you define? There was some chatter in the chat about exactly what is no fault divorce. And so before you answer Krista's question, can you just help maybe give us like a 2-sentence, 3-sentence explanation as to what is no fault divorce, so then we're all on the same page?
This will not be 3 sentences. I apologize. What we had typically, right, starting with, all throughout that church history that we talked about, and then into like the 1800s and 1900s when we had sort of civil laws governing marriage, we had what we called at-fault divorce. One of the spouses needed to be deemed at fault for breaking the marital covenant. What were the grounds for somebody being at fault? Adultery, abandonment, addiction, abuse, right? Those are the grounds to say you are at fault. You have broken your word. You are not loving me and committed to me in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, till death do us part, right? For better or for worse. No, you've refused to stay with me and fulfill these vows. Here are the grounds. And then what would happen is the one that broke the vow was punished. They were looked down on by society. They would not get joint custody. They would have to pay alimony. They would not get 50% of the assets. Like, there was a consequence to being at fault for breaking your marital vows. But then moving into the late 60s and early 70s, people said, well, this is really awful, because sometimes we just want to get a divorce and then we have to lie about somebody committing adultery or somebody being abusive, and that's not fair. So why can't we just have no fault divorce, where nobody's at fault for the divorce and we can just get married if it's not working out?
We fell out of love, or we just, it's not making me happy anymore, or I found someone else.
Irreconcilable differences, right? Yeah. And Ronald Reagan was the first governor in California in 1969 to pass no fault divorce laws, I believe, because his first marriage ended in that kind of situation where they kind of had to falsely accuse somebody, and that was really mean. And so, well, why can't we just have no fault divorce laws? Well, what resulted is divorce rates almost tripled, in that, within the couple decades after no fault divorce was passed. And what no fault divorce ended up being was not just this sort of mutual, I guess this is over. It ended up being unilateral divorce. Very often, spouses being divorced against their will, where one spouse was virtuous or trying to keep the family together or do what was best for the kids or live up to their vows. And then you had one spouse that was misbehaving, very often with the support of the community. And then they would actually have the most power in the divorce proceedings because they wanted the marriage the least. And then if there was somebody that was at fault for adultery or addiction or abandonment or even abuse that wasn't proven, the judge would evaluate everybody equally. The misbehaving spouse would get just as much social favor, custody, acquisitions as the faithful spouse. They could not make a distinction between the two. So what it did is it de-incentivized good behavior because there was no consequences for bad behavior. And so no fault divorce actually has been one of the greatest blights on family. It was the original redefinition of marriage. If you've got those 3 aspects of a biblical definition of marriage: complementarity, male and female, exclusivity, no outside partners, and permanence, lifelong, divorce did away with permanence. And that was a devastation, not just for individual children, but for all of marriage throughout the country.
So in that sense, then you would see.
We have to get back to your abuse question, which we can't.
No, that's fine. But in that sense, you would see no fault divorce as kind of being unjust toward the faithful spouse. The spouse is trying to work it out and walk a road and do the hard thing, keep the family together. No fault divorce undermines that. But then is the burden of proof so high? Because what we hear is that, back in the day, it was almost impossible to get a divorce. And so women were subjected to staying in abusive marriages, and no fault divorce helped alleviate that problem.
There are certainly cases. So abuse can be hard to prove. That is true. It's true that abuse can be hard to prove. But what is the alternative? Let's say that there is an abusive marriage now with kids, and the wife, for example, wants to get out of it quickly, which is understandable. And so she takes the exit through a no-fault divorce situation. If that man's really abusive, the judge cannot say, hey, you're an abuser, you're not going to get the kids. The kids are still going to be with the abusive spouse. So it's like, to me, this is not a solve. I mean, when there's no kids involved, I'm like, okay, that makes a little more sense, except that the removal of permanence actually impacts everybody society-wide. But I think that if there's an abusive situation, they should go to prison. They should get nothing. They should be punished. No fault divorce does not allow for that. So yes, in some situations, it made some abused wives specifically, gave them an easier exit. But I think the consequences to society and to the children who no longer had the mediating presence of, for example, the mother in the home, I don't necessarily think that was the right swap.
Well, now, what about this argument of staying together for the sake of the children? Something that you brought my attention to through social media posts called gray divorce. Couples who maybe have low conflict marriage, but they're unhappy, but they tough it out for the sake of their children, and they get divorced once the children go off to college. And it's called gray divorce because of, I'm assuming, the gray hair that you have by that point in your life. What about that? Does that have less impact on the children once they're grown? Is that, if you're going to get divorced, you're generally unhappy, is that a better way to go?
Yeah, good question. We've actually seen overall a decline in the crude divorce rate over the last several decades. So it kind of peaked at 5.3% per 1,000 people, right? And that's like including children and everybody. So and now it's down to about like 3%. So we've seen a decline in the crude divorce rate and a decline in divorce among every age group. And the reason is not necessarily because divorce is declining, but because very few people are getting married. Fewer marriages, fewer divorce. Unfortunately, that's the reason for the divorce decline. There is one group where you're seeing an increase in divorce, and that's in people over 65, what you rightly termed gray divorce. And what we see there is a tripling of the divorce rate over the last, I think, since 1995. So we don't have a lot of data and research on how this impacts kids, but I personally have gathered the stories of a lot of children who experience gray divorce. They talk to me privately. And it's devastating for them. I was just actually talking with a woman last week because there was a story that was shared in like Wired magazine of like, it was titled like, she's estranged from her children, so she's adopted other kids and grandkids. Well, if you read in the article, she's estranged from her children because she's an older woman that divorced her husband that had a brain injury, and seemingly remarried right away. And it's only been like 5 years. And her daughters very clearly said, how could you abandon our father like this and run off with this guy? But of course, the magazine frames it as, oh, she's estranged and her daughters don't want anything to do with her. Well, let's just talk about, from the daughter's perspective, what that means. Mom is off living her carefree life on a goat farm, shacking up with the new guy and adopting all of these other, families where she doesn't have any kind of obligation to them. What about the two girls? Now they're going to be caring for their elderly disabled father. If they have children, now they're going to be caregivers on both ends of the spectrum. Mom's just out there footloose and fancy free. Will this impede their ability to, they've got the divorce, harder to form relationships. Now they've got less time because now they're dad's primary caregivers. Now, are they even going to have time to find a spouse? When they do, will they have children? Because so much of their time is going to be consumed with caring for their father. So if you want to talk about an injustice, I think gray divorce is horrible. I've talked to people whose Christian parents have divorced when they are 40 and they've got 3 young kids in the home. And they go, I'm sorry, didn't you raise me saying that this is a covenantal relationship, not a consumer relationship? But now you've just thrown away my mother or thrown away my father. Was everything that you told me a lie? It is incredibly destabilizing, even for these 30-year-olds or 40-year-olds or 45-year-old men and women who are successful in their jobs and raising their own family. And suddenly they go, everything's a lie. And now I'm the one that is going to have to do the caregiving up and down. So we don't have a lot of stats on it, but I will tell you, it is incredibly destabilizing for kids, even if they are adults when their parents get divorced.
I think that it's an important question because, like I said before, as somebody who's been married for over 3 decades, life is long. There are a lot of seasons. There's some seasons are easier than others. Some feel like you will not make it. And I think that sometimes it's even hard to tell when you get into your 40s, often, of what's the difference between a difficult marriage and I need to tough this out versus I'm emotionally exhausted. I can't do this anymore. And, is this abusive? I mean, sometimes that line is very difficult to discern.
Mhm.
And I think that understanding the impacts of divorce can act as a guardrail in those moments when you're feeling like, I can't do this for one more minute. I can't have this same conflict for one more minute. Having a sober mind about, what would be worse than me enduring this hard minute would be throwing away something and the impact that will have on my children and my grandchildren. And I think that we could talk about safety. We can talk about, when people need to get to safety. But enduring those hard moments, I don't know. For me, knowing these things has helped me in those difficult moments to say, I will persevere. I will keep trying for the sake of my children and the sake of my grandchildren, should God bring those to us.
Well, Ryan and I have a couple years that I refer to as the warring years, where he felt like he was my enemy. Like I'd just be bopping around the house, working around the house, like typing, frenzying all these things. And I would see him pull into the driveway and it just like I was just ready for a fight. There was so much like conflict between us for a couple years for several reasons. We did not think about divorce, but our marriage was not happy. I feel like the only time that we really had peace is we would play cribbage together. Like cards were the only like non-hostile thing that we did together. And then we went through some really intense marriage counseling, like a week-long grinding, grueling process with like accountability, like 2 different couples in the room, like holding us accountable and all of that. And God right-sized that ship. And we had a very sweet year when we resolved that, and things have been really good since then. And it's interesting because a lot of people are like, well, should you stay together for the kids? And the answer is yeah, but you should also stay together because of you.
Yeah.
Like we actually have studied couples that have divorced on average, now there's exceptions up and down. On average, people are no happier after the divorce when they were together. And we have studies that show that people who choose to work it out and stay together through the difficult seasons, 7 years later, and then 11 years later, the majority of them are very happy in their marriage. So oftentimes those seasons are temporary. Not to say that they are light and easy. Hopefully, if you're in one of them right now, get thee to church. Find people who love you. Talk to people who can minister to you, give you breaks, give you wise counsel. Hopefully, your husband, I assume most of your audience is female, your husband needs good men who are speaking into his life. So it's like, if you don't have a community, I don't want to say that there's no hope, but you might be toast if you're trying to do this alone.
Yeah.
Get thee to church.
I think that's such good advice. Like, men need men, and
Yes.
women need women, and married couples need married couples. And trying to do, and I'm not married, so here I am as the outsider looking in. But what I've noticed is that the couples that have community, whether it's at their church or whatever that is, there's something different. But community is good. And community is good when you're single too. But the community and the accountability, I really think it does make a difference. What would you say to people who are thinking that, I don't know if this is gonna work. Like, it might be better on the other side. How would you advise them or exhort them to understand a difficult season or a difficult bump in their relationship versus, hey, you should probably get to safety. Hey, this divorce really might be necessary. What are those distinctions or differences, and how would you speak to them?
You need wise counsel, number one. But if it's not a situation of clear-cut abuse or adultery, or abandonment or addiction, right? If it's not one of the big A's, you probably need to grow, or he needs to grow, or you both need to grow. The solution cannot be to burden your children with split homes and split lives and all of the different physical and psychological harms that are going to go with it. It is simply a transference of hard work from your shoulder to theirs, and that is an injustice. Maybe you are genuinely in danger, in which case, get help. But that's probably not where the majority of struggling marriages are these days. You're struggling because it is hard to be in a relationship with somebody for a few days, a few years, and certainly for a lifetime. Get good people around you. All of us need wise counsel. I often say you should not tell everybody everything, but you should tell somebody everything. Find somebody that you can tell everything to do. Hopefully it's somebody that's a few steps ahead of you, who has incredible biblical maturity, who can offer you biblical counsel and give you actionable items that you can start to implement, walk with you. Hopefully your husband has somebody that's doing the same with him. We have seen marriages. We have seen glorious transformations from some of the greatest depths to the highest heights. With Christ, literally all things are possible. But I will tell you, you better get serious about obedience and community if that's what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Good counsel.
That is. Well, community is important.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Katy. This has been a great conversation, given us a lot to think about. And I'm going to be curious as to what kind of feedback we get on the show.
Katy, do you have 2 minutes? Because someone asked the question. I think it's an important question.
Yep.
Says, what should one do if one's spouse wants out because they tried to work out problems and do marital counseling, etc., but the spouse refuses to take part?
Yes, this is a big problem with no-fault divorce, because there isn't any incentive for him or her to do the hard work. You're in this alone. Maybe you've got some good church people that are trying to pressure the husband or the wife to do the right thing and reform their ways, but you don't have the help of the civil government who is restraining evil, promoting good, and bringing order. Unfortunately, no-fault divorce did away with all of those different guardrails. So I assume you're diligently praying, trying to examine yourself. What can you change about you? All of that is very, very good. Let's just say that this person is a guy, because I've just talked with a lot of women in those situations, even though statistically women are responsible for 69% of divorces. Unfortunately, men tend to be happier with sort of a lower level of like marital satisfaction. Women tend to be very, very high demand. And if he doesn't rise to that, they leave. So that's a bit of a problem. But let's just say that the person that is unwilling to reform is a guy. The advice that I give to women is there's two things that changes men's behavior. Number one is consequences, hard consequences. So let's just say that it's a spending problem and, he keeps going out and spending, exorbitant amounts of money on his boat and you guys are not paying the bills. Somehow those consequences have to be his problem. So don't rescue him out of the consequences. Let him taste them full force. It's not you nagging him. It is him receiving the penalty of his bad decisions in terms of money or in terms of how he's spending his time. The other thing that tends to change men's behavior, in my opinion, is not you saying, please don't look at porn. It is other men going, what the F are you doing, you absolute idiot? Do you know what you're doing to your wife? She is one of the best women that I know. Look at your kids. Is that how you're going to treat her mother? Dude, you have got to grow up. What is your problem? That is what changes men.
Yes.
That they respect, calling them to a higher standard, which is why I've said that if you're not in church and you don't have good people around you, this is a very, very hard row to hoe. This all begins with community for you, for him, because he needs those men speaking into his life. It is hard for men to reform if they are not personally experiencing the consequences of their own behavior. Having other men call them to a higher standard. You can do only so much. You can be an exemplary wife. You can make sure that you are characterized by wisdom and beauty and godliness and good boundaries. You can pray, and you should say it to him once. It would be an act of love to me if you would never visit a porn site again. And then after that, figure out what your boundaries are and pray like hell the other good men get in there and slap that phone out of his hand in the name of Jesus.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Katy.
That so much wisdom packed in there, and I just love the direct clarity with which you speak.
Yeah, the importance of men speaking into men and say, stop that. Stop doing that.
And also,
same for women.
Yeah, same for women, but also men manning up. Like the whole issue that we see in our culture right now of, this lack of true masculinity. And, part of that leads men to isolate, leads men to phones, where I think at one point in our history, masculinity also involved that, community, that gathering, that we're going to get together and we're going to talk about the hard things, but we're also going to, do whatever the manly thing is that they did. They're going to go and do those things. But, this idea of, I don't have to leave the house, I don't have to, go and be with people. It contributes to that, because then now you're just in relationship with your computer or you're in relationship with your phone, and you're not in relationship with real people.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, we got to go.
Let me just say that I skimmed the surface on a lot. I've got a whole chapter with all these stats and citations. Chapter 5 of our first book, Them Before Us, Why We Need a Global Children's Rights Movement. If you have questions or you're like, Katy's out of her mind, go there. You can look it up yourself. We've got 100 citations in that chapter alone, and probably 24 stories of kids who went through it.
Awesome. Thanks, Katy.
Yep. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks so much. Talk to you later.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so we have a special second guest who's going to hop on with us right now. Here comes trouble. Is he there? There he is. It's Kunkel.
Oh, Kunkel. Hello.
Hello.
Everyone, this is Brett Kunkel. He is the founder and president of Maven Ministries. And we will allow you to talk a little bit about what you do at Maven. Aside from working my nerve. But aside from that, he's also my pastor and someone that I love very, very much. I like his wife and kids more, but
Everyone does. Everyone does.
Someone in the chat said, Uncle Kunkel.
Yeah. So tell us about Maven and what you guys are doing this year on your conference tour.
Yeah, well, really, we started Maven 7 years ago to help equip the next generation with a biblical worldview. And so that means that we also focus on the adults who are equipping and training the students as well with a biblical worldview. And so what we do every year is one of our resources is our annual Maven conference. And we actually started in Southern California 7 years ago. So this will be our seventh annual Maven conference in Southern California. And we have also expanded, and this fall will be in Texas, Fort Worth area, or sorry, Dallas, Fort Worth area, north of Dallas and Frisco. And that will be our third conference there in Texas. And then we're doing our first one in Indianapolis. And anyone wants to find out more information about the conferences, they can go to mavenconferences.com. And the conference really is a worldview and culture conference for adults and students. Those are our two primary audiences. And we want to take a Christian worldview and apply it to the pressing challenges of the culture. And so that's really the key to our conference. And this year, our theme is truth and courage, and really trying to figure out, okay, how do we navigate the cultural moment and the different challenges by, number one, knowing the truth, and then number two, developing courage. And of course, I think those two things are very closely linked. When you know the truth, it is one of the key components in helping you to develop courage to engage the world of ideas and the challenges that we face. And so there's a number of different sessions that we'll be covering that will really help us get a kind of a feel for some of the major challenges in the culture.
And the best part is that Monique's going to be speaking, and so am I.
Come hang out with the family.
That's right.
I was about to, that was saving the best for last.
That's right.
Oh, I thought maybe we weren't speaking no more. I was like, maybe we need to have a conversation offline.
Yeah.
No, yeah, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers that include Monique and Krista. In fact, most of our I'd say, yeah, the majority of our speakers are going to be at every one of the conferences. So we're just taking that theme and we're doing it in different parts of the country. And so truth and courage will be the theme in California, Texas, and Indianapolis. Our four main sessions are going to be covering the culture and kind of where we're at. In fact, Aaron Wren, who wrote the book Life in the Negative World, is going to open it up with a session on culture, dealing with kind of the anti-Christian ideas and sentiments of the culture. We'll be dealing with two of the most prominent challenges that you could call them undercurrents in the culture. It's the challenge of expressive individualism, and then the challenge of critical theory, and how those two ideas poison so much of modern American culture. And they seep in to everything from family and parenting to government to education to business. I mean, there's no sphere of life that's not untouched by these two ideas. And then our last main session will really talk about, okay, how do we cultivate this virtue of courage? And so that'll be our four main sessions. Then we've got two sets of breakout sessions. We've got in different tracks. So we have a student track for the students that attend. We have a parent track. We have a culture track, apologetics track, and a theology track. Wow. So it's a very comprehensive conference, and we're excited to have both of you guys at all of the conferences. We don't let everyone speak at all of the conferences, only special people like you.
We appreciate it. We appreciate it. But who are some of the other speakers? I know Aaron Wren is going to be there. Neil Shinvey.
Yeah, well, I mean, besides the A-listers like you, we got some B-listers. So, Aaron Wren, Neil Shenvi he won't be at our California conference. He'll be doing the Texas and Indianapolis conference. Our good friend Thaddeus Williams he'll be at all three of them.
No, he's trouble. I didn't know he was going to be there.
Well, I made sure I didn't tell you before I got you guys to agree, because he's a lot of trouble. Thaddeus, my wife, Erin will be there. She'll be doing the parent track at each one of the conferences. And in fact, one of her talks is a new talk that she's developing for the conference called it's entitled Why Gentle Parenting Doesn't Work with Real Kids, and hitting that topic where we see the ideas of expressive individualism and critical theory seeping into parenting. Then in California, Ryan Pauly, he's our director of immersive experiences here at Maven. He's going to be speaking at the youth track. In Southern California, Doug Axe, who's a professor at Biola University, he is going to be doing some scientific apologetics, hitting evolution, and he'll also be hitting AI in our breakout sessions. So I'm looking forward to hearing Doug on that. Just a brilliant guy who's done a lot of work in the intelligent design movement. Wrote a great book called Undeniable. And then Jonathan Morrow, our good friend from Impact 360, he's going to be doing sessions as well. So I think between all of us, there's like 9 different speakers that will be speaking at the California conference.
Well, that's awesome. That is awesome. Yeah, that gentle parenting, we need to go ahead and just...
We're going to have Erin on in a couple months to talk about of that. She's going to come on and talk about gentle parenting with
if you don't have
children.
Gentle kids. If your kids rise up early in the morning offering you that elbow, gentle parenting ain't for you. I'm just saying. Gentle parenting, it's not for all children. You got to gentle parent gentle kids. I'm just saying, y'all. Some of y'all out here trying to gentle parent Popeye and his crew. You can't gentle parent that. I'm sorry. I'm not a parent. I know somebody in the gentle parenting crew is going to email me. Info at Center for Biblical Unity.
Send all your complaints to info at centerforbiblicalunity.com.
It's all right. It's all right. So remind us the dates and how we can register, because family, we need to be there. Well, I'm going to be there, and we're going to be there, but you need to be there. So how do they register?
Yeah, well, I obviously we think you need to be there, but we as Christians have got to be diligent in watching the culture, paying attention to the culture, paying attention to the ideas that infect the culture, because they infect the church, because we haven't been careful. And you see, the last 4 years, we have watched Christian institution after Christian institution struggle with secular ideas creeping in. And that really was motivating to pick the theme that we did this year, to help Christians be aware of these ideas and then be prepared for them. So the California conference is coming up in a few weeks. It's Saturday, February the 22nd. In fact, every conference is all day Saturday from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. And so Southern California, February 22nd. For those of you who can't make Southern California, but you're interested in Texas, that's Saturday, September the 6th. Indianapolis is Saturday, November the 8th. And if you're interested in registering, just go to mavenconferences.com. That'll take you to a landing page. You can pick your conference there. You can click on California, and then that'll take you to the California homepage that will give you all the information on the conference, the schedule, the speakers, the breakout sessions, everything that's included, and you can register there. And if you're interested, you can't make it in person, you can also sign up for the live stream.
Very good.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, Brett, for hopping on with us and talking about it.
Yes, looking forward to it. It's going to be good. It's always good.
Yeah,
I've said it before, but it is one of my favorites. It's like
no, go ahead. No.
It is my favorite. I'm trying.
There you go.
I'm trying to still be, politically correct.
It
is my favorite.
She likes the Colson Center thing the best.
No, I no, maybe yeah.
Where?
Stone Street.
We're gonna have a talk.
It is it Maven. It would be Maven
pastoral-
conference, and then Wilberforce weekend.
There you go.
It
Okay.
is.
The proper order.
And he's not even paying me to do this. It's yeah, and it's not because he's my pastor, because he's really, no, I'm just playing, Brett. Well,
See,
thank
this
you
is why
so much.
I love working with you guys. You guys are so much fun. You're
You
not
are.
only are you good partners and we're like-minded, but you're also pretty fun. I mean,
We try to keep it, keep it real over here.
And we do want to let people know about your parent podcast with you and Aaron, produced by the one and only Emily Bontrager, the lovely and gracious Emily Bontrager.
Who's sitting right here.
But go check out the parenting podcast, and we'll have Aaron on in a couple months to talk about gentle parenting. So looking forward to that.
Yes.
yeah.
And
Thanks,
with
Brett.
that, I'll see you tomorrow.
All right. Thanks, guys.
All right.
Bye.
we'll see you.
Thanks.
Bye. Okay, we made it to the end.
We did. We did it. All right. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we shall see you.
Wait, what's
see?
next week?
I'm not sure.
Next week, you are not around.
Yeah.
And
But we will
are
still-
dark. And then hopefully we're going to have Eric Muldrow for the 22nd.
Okay. So we will not have a show next week, but
Hopefully, God willing, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
all right, guys. Have a great weekend and a great week. Bye.
Bye-bye.
There's nothing